Alright, so I've got the model all UV mapped, and I'm back in Maya. So this is my original model from before doing the UV mapping. Um, so if we look in here, panel, UV texture editor, you can see there's no UVs on this one. So I'm going to put this one in its own layer. I'm going to call it original. Okay. So I'm just going to hide that for now. And we need to import the UV mapped model from UV layout. So I've saved it as a separate one in here, concept weapon 01, and then I added UV, so I know that's the UV one. You don't really want to overwrite your original one because, you know, if you make a mistake or whatever, it might not matter with just having one version, but I prefer to save it out as a separate file. So I'm just going to import that. Now, when we import, you can see all the faces are, you know, pretty visible because all of the normals have been reset to just faces. So there's no normal smoothing going on this model. So I'm probably going to want to go ahead and fix that by assigning a normal angle. So I'm going to set the normal angle and try something like 45 and just see what it looks like. So that's 45. Now what this is this is going to smooth the normals based on the angle of, you know, faces that are next to each other. So like here we have a slight curvature, so it's going to smooth those. But then in areas like over here where the angle is sharper than that 45 degrees, it's going to make those just be hard edges. So I'm going to go in and adjust some of these to be hard still because I still want some of the edges to be a little crisper than what they are after that process. So maybe those, some of them in here I'm going to probably want to smooth too, but I especially want like the hard edges on the blade. So I'm just going to use my G key to keep hardening various edges. So you can see when I harden those edges, it looks a lot sharper, and that's what we want on certain areas. So I'm probably going to do that here. And I want this sharp, this sharp, this sharp. So I'm just making some of the edges sharper. That way, you know, I get the look that I intend. Overall, though, I'm pretty happy with most of these. Some of them I might go ahead and soften. I think if I soften these, that'll look a little better. Let's see. I'm gonna leave these hard for now. I kind of like that edge. I might change that later. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Like I said, I might change some of those as I go along, but in general, I'm pretty happy with that. I might harden this here, but I only want the top part, not the grip. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a new scene. I go ahead and delete my history. Just resave that. Okay. Now I'm going to add this model to a layer, and I'm going to call this low res. Then I'm going to duplicate. I'm going to remove the duplicate from the layer, and I'm going to turn that layer off. Okay. So now I have this model separate from the one that I just put in the layer. And I'm going to put this new duplicate model in its own layer. I'm going to call it high res. Okay, so now I have a high res and I have a low res. Now with this high res here, I'm going to go ahead and hit mesh and separate. That's going to break it back down into all of its original parts. And so now this is where I'm going to go in and I'm going to start tweaking things and adding edge loops for a high resolution version of this model with smoothing applied. So I'll go over this process briefly with an example piece or two, and then we'll move on. I'll do just some time lapse for this, and then when that's all done, we'll have a high res version with nice smoothing, and then we can move on to doing some texturing. So let's just use this piece as an example. So if I hit 3 on the keyboard, I get a smooth preview. So you can see things are much smoother with that. I believe I have mine set to 2 iterations of smoothing, which you can change in, I forget where you change it actually. I think it's in the settings somewhere, in preferences and settings, but by default I believe it's 2 iterations of smoothing. So this preview would be the same as if I went without the preview and I went to mesh and I click smooth and I did exponential smoothing with 2 divisions. By default I just keep it on 1 division because usually that's enough. You don't want to add too much geometry right off the bat. So if you're using Mental Ray to render, you don't even need to do an actual physical smoothing. You can just put it into the preview mode and then render with Mental Ray, and it'll render the previewed smoothing. If you're using something like V-Ray or Maya Software Render, then you're going to need to go ahead and smooth that with the actual Mesh Smooth option, which will add geometry. So I'm going to undo that. So for now I'm just going to be working with the preview smoothing. I can always smooth it later and get the same results or very similar results by doing the Mesh Smooth. So looking at this, it's very smooth, which is nice. That's, you know, to a degree what we want, but certain parts are smoother than what we want. So we want to sharpen those edges, and the easiest way to do that is by just adding edge loops. So right around here, like I know I want this to be a crisp separation, you know, I want a hard edge. So I'm going to add an edge loop pretty close on either side of that edge loop that was already in there, and then if I hit 3, you can see now that the edge is sharper. So basically I'm just going to go in and I'm going to do that in every location that I want a sharper edge. So like I want this outer edge sharper. And there's other ways to get similar results doing this kind of thing. You can even use Mental Ray has a material. It has an option that you can change to render things with smoothed edges, but I'm just going to do it this way. It's simple. It gives you the most control, pretty easy. But you do want to be careful. Like here, I'm getting a crisp edge where I don't really want a crisp edge because I've put that edge loop all the way up. So you just need to go in and move these manually away from that point. Or alternatively, you could remove that edge loop from that point on. But keep in mind that's going to change your smoothing because you're going to end up with triangles and stuff. The main problem with doing this, if I have to move the edges away, it's going to affect my UV mapping because it's going to cause stretching at these points. Okay, so I kind of like that. It's a little sharper on the handle, but I like that, so I'm going to keep that for now. Okay, and I want a crisp edge here, so I'm just going to add another edge loop. And that just sharpens that up. So let's check out some other parts. Let's say this part here. So I've got here, it's getting kind of rounded when I know I want that to be a sharp edge. So I'm going to add a couple edge loops and see how it looks. I'm getting some strange deformation here. So you just want to crispen it up and try to avoid smoothing issues. So like in here I'm getting some sort of pinching. So I'm going to see if I can fix that. It's not 100% fixed, but it's not terrible. And if I continue to add edge loops, I've basically cleared that up. So I'm just going to keep going through and doing this to basically any of the pieces that I think will benefit from it. So I'm going to do that in time lapse, and then when I come back we'll be ready to move on to some texturing. Okay, so I've gone in and I've smoothed a lot of the stuff out, and I'm pretty satisfied with how it's looking now. I had to move a few edges, particularly on this piece, and I think there was one other piece that I had to move a few edges. So that'll affect my UVs. I might have to correct them later on. So this step is optional, of course. If you are happy with just the low poly or low res version, I should say, you know, feel free to go ahead with that, and you don't necessarily have to do this stage. But if you want a nice like render piece, it's helpful to have those edges smoothed out. It'll make it look cleaner, and it just makes it a little more sleek and interesting. If I take this and I add it, I have a render layer over here set up to do occlusions. So if I do an occlusion on this using mental ray, all those little smooth edges will help make it look just a little more interesting, a little bit nicer. So it's something that you can do. Next, we'll be going on to texturing. I'm going to texture the low-res version, and then I'm going to see also how that looks on the high-res version, because they both share the same UVs, but obviously the smooth version is going to be slightly different because of the smoothing. Um, so I might have to adjust some of them manually on the high res version. But we'll go ahead and texture the low res version, and we'll just see how it looks. It's looking good so far, though, as just a model. So I'm excited to get it textured and see how it looks and get some materials on there and do some different renders and stuff. So I'll talk to you next time.